Sometimes the hardest part isn't losing something. It's watching it slip away slowly, quietly, until there's nothing left to hold on to. The neon sign of La Tavola flickered weakly against the encroaching darkness, casting a faint, uncertain glow over the cracked sidewalk. Once a beloved cornerstone of the neighborhood, the small Italian restaurant had become a shadow of its former self. The wooden tables, once surrounded by laughter and the clinking of silverware, now sat abandoned. The familiar scent of garlic and fresh bread had long since faded, replaced by a silence that pressed heavily on the air. Sophia Malone stood behind the bar, her hands automatically wiping down the counter, though her mind was elsewhere. She stared blankly at the empty chairs, her heart heavy with the weight of the restaurant's decline. The dream she had once nurtured, filling the place with the warmth of family, friends, and good food, seemed to be slipping through her fingers. The debts were piling up, and the steady stream of customers she once had now vanished. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going. The thought of selling La Tavola was becoming more real by the day, though she resisted. After all, how could she let go of something she had built with so much love and effort? As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, a faint sound caught her attention, the soft chime of the bell above the door. Sophia turned, expecting nothing more than another empty evening. But instead, a man and a young girl stepped into the dimly lit restaurant. The man appeared worn, as though life had not been kind to him. His clothes were frayed, his face weathered by years of hardship. The girl, standing beside him, looked timid, her wide eyes scanning the empty space around them. They didn't belong in this place, at least not in the way that people usually did. The man's voice broke the quiet. "Excuse me, ma'am. We're looking for a place to stay, just for the night, if it's possible." Sophia hesitated. The restaurant was struggling as it was, and the idea of inviting strangers to stay seemed absurd. But something in the man's eyes, a quiet desperation, reminded her of her own situation. She knew what it felt like to be at the end of your rope. "All right," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You can stay upstairs, but you'll have to work around here tomorrow. I can't offer much else." The man nodded, relief crossing his face. "Thank you. We'll do whatever we can." As they made their way upstairs, Sophia stood frozen for a moment, torn by the decision she'd just made. What was she thinking? Her restaurant was already struggling. How could she take on more responsibility? But there was something about them, something that made her believe she wasn't just doing this out of pity. There was a chance here, a strange kind of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could breathe some life back into La Tavola. Rosa, Sophia's daughter, appeared from the kitchen, a curious look in her eyes. Who were they? Sophia glanced at her, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just two people who need a place to stay for the night." Rosa nodded, but there was a trace of concern in her eyes. It was clear that she, too, felt the weight of the situation, of the uncertainty that now hung over their small family business. Still, something in the air felt different tonight, and Sophia couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something she hadn't expected. The night had grown colder, and the rain tapped gently against the windows of La Tavola, adding to the desolation of the restaurant. Sophia was alone again, cleaning the counter and glancing out into the empty street, wondering if there was any hope left for the place she had poured her heart into. The hum of the refrigerator and the faint sounds of traffic outside filled the silence, until the door creaked open. A figure appeared in the doorway, soaked to the bone. It was the man from earlier, standing with his head lowered, his worn jacket clinging to his thin frame. Beside him was a young girl, her eyes wide with a quiet determination and her hair clinging damply to her face. They didn't speak at first, but there was something about them, something that made Sophia pause. The man stepped forward, his voice soft but tinged with exhaustion. "I'm sorry to bother you. We've been traveling for days and haven't had any luck. We were hoping you could let us stay the night." His voice was rough, like gravel, and his tired eyes never quite met hers. Sophia looked them over, her mind racing. The restaurant's finances were already stretched thin, and the idea of bringing strangers into the space was unsettling. But as she gazed at the man, his shoulders sagging with weariness, something inside her softened. He looked defeated, but not dangerous. And the girl, her quiet presence spoke volumes. She was so small, yet there was a calm about her that made Sophia feel an unfamiliar sense of responsibility. "Where do you come from?" Sophia asked, trying to make sense of their situation. The man hesitated. We used to live in the city. I used to be a musician, but that feels like a lifetime ago. Things changed after my wife passed. I've been looking for work, but it's been hard. My daughter Lily and we just need a roof over our heads for tonight." Sophia nodded slowly, the weight of their words sinking in. It was clear they didn't want charity. They were just two people trying to survive. After a long moment, Sophia made up her mind. "All right. You can stay upstairs for the night, but I'll need you to help around here tomorrow. I can't offer much, but I can give you food and shelter." The man's face lit up with a tired smile, and he nodded. "Thank you. I'll do whatever I can." Lily, standing beside him, gave a small, shy smile of her own, but she didn't say anything. She only looked at Sophia with a quiet grace that caught Sophia off guard. "Thank you," the girl whispered. Sophia felt something stir in her chest, a strange mix of gratitude and sadness. It wasn't just the man and his daughter who needed help. La Tavola needed it too. She didn't know it yet, but this small act of kindness might be the very thing that turned her world around. The next few hours passed in a blur as Sophia showed Jack and Lily upstairs. They set up a small space for them in the loft, which had once been a storage area now filled with empty boxes and forgotten furniture. Sophia offered them a blanket and some hot food, though she couldn't help but feel the sting of guilt. There wasn't much to offer, but at least it was something. As Jack and Lily settled into their temporary space, Sophia returned to the restaurant, her mind racing. She had made a decision, but she couldn't shake the feeling that her life, and the restaurant, was about to change in ways she couldn't yet understand. The rain continued to fall outside, but for the first time in a long while, La Tavola felt a little less empty. Sophia paced back and forth in the dimly lit kitchen, the sounds of the rain still tapping against the windows. Her mind was a whirlwind of doubt. Letting a beggar and his daughter stay in La Tavola, it felt like a risk she couldn't afford. But somehow, she had agreed. She had seen the exhaustion in Jack's eyes, and the quiet resolve in Lily. They weren't asking for a handout, they were asking for a chance. But Sophia couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in her chest. This was a business, not a charity, and she was already treading water with debts she could barely keep track of. Could they afford this? Could she even afford the little they had agreed upon? Still, Sophia knew she couldn't have turned them away. The decision had been made, and she would have to make the best of it, no matter how uncertain it felt. There was something about them, about Jack's tired smile, Lily's quiet demeanour, that tugged at her heart. It wasn't charity. It was something more. Maybe it was a moment of humanity, a recognition that sometimes the right thing to do doesn't always make sense on paper. The door to the kitchen creaked open, and Rosa stepped inside. Sophia looked up, forcing a smile. Rosa had been quieter than usual since Jack and Lily arrived. Her daughter had always been sensitive, attuned to the shifting moods in the house, but today, Sophia noticed a certain unease in her eyes. "Are they settling in okay?" Rosa asked, glancing toward the stairs that led up to the loft. Sophia nodded, though the answer wasn't so simple. They're fine. Jack is grateful, and Lily seems… well, they'll make do. It's only for a while. Rosa pursed her lips, not convinced. You know, I don't know if this was a good idea, she said quietly, not meeting her mother's eyes. We don't even know them, and you're letting them stay here, in our restaurant. Sophia's heart sank. She had known this would be hard for Rosa. Her daughter had always been shy, and the thought of strangers living in their space made her uncomfortable. But Sophia needed Rosa to understand. This wasn't about just taking in anyone. This was about offering something that might be the only chance these two had. I know it's not ideal, but we don't have many choices right now. We'll work together, okay? Just give it time. Rosa didn't say anything more. She simply nodded, though her reluctance hung in the air between them. Later that evening, as the sounds of rain faded and the restaurant fell into a quiet lull, Rosa found herself wandering into the kitchen, unable to focus on anything for too long. She tried to push aside her discomfort with the new guests, but her mind kept drifting to them. The way Jack had looked when he thanked her mother. The way Lily had stayed so still, so quiet, as if she were holding something back. Then, a voice caught her attention. A soft, haunting melody rising from the kitchen. At first, Rosa thought it was just the wind outside, but as she stepped closer to the door, she realized it was coming from inside the restaurant. Lily was standing by the sink, washing dishes, her soft voice filling the room. It was quiet, almost tentative, but with a beauty that took Rosa's breath away. The song was unfamiliar, an old Italian ballad that echoed with longing and heartache. Rosa froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She had always loved music, but hearing Lily sing was something else. It was like hearing her own thoughts come to life in the form of song. For a moment, Rosa was overcome with a feeling she couldn't name. Something between awe and envy. Rosa didn't know why she stayed. She was too shy to say anything, too self-conscious to step forward. Instead, she lingered quietly, listening to Lily's voice, which seemed to fill the space around her. And though she longed to say something, to approach the girl who seemed so at ease with her talent, Rosa held back, too afraid to make her presence known. As the last notes of the song faded away, Rosa exhaled slowly, feeling a strange mix of emotions. She wasn't sure what it was: fear, jealousy, or maybe something else entirely. But one thing was certain. She couldn't ignore the pull of that voice, and she couldn't shake the feeling that things were changing in ways she didn't yet understand. Lily's song had brought something out in her, something that felt both exciting and unsettling. The next few days at La Tavola passed in a quiet rhythm. Jack and Lily settled into their new routine, helping with small tasks around the restaurant. Jack would wash dishes, sweep the floors, and occasionally play his guitar for a few minutes when he had the chance. He was a man of few words, but when he did speak, it was with a kind of quiet confidence that commanded attention. Sophia was still adjusting to their presence, unsure if she had made the right decision. She had agreed to give them shelter for a short while, but she didn't want to complicate things further. The restaurant was struggling enough as it was. One afternoon, as Jack was finishing up the lunch rush, he put down his guitar with a thoughtful expression on his face. Sophia, standing by the counter, noticed him looking at the empty tables. "You know," Jack began, his voice soft but deliberate, "I've been thinking." Sophia raised an eyebrow, her hands busy wiping down the counter. "About what?" Jack paused, then spoke carefully, as if testing the waters. "You've got a good space here, Sophia. A lot of history. But if you don't mind me saying so, the place could use something more. People need a reason to come in." He looked over at Lily, who was quietly organizing napkins at a nearby table, before continuing. "I used to play music in small cafes back in the day. and I think it could work here. If you let me play a bit while Lily sings, maybe it would bring in a crowd." Sophia blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. "What? Like a performance?" Jack nodded, his gaze steady. "Yeah. I know you've got your traditional menu, your regular customers. But maybe it's time for something different. People want an experience these days. If you had music in the background, live music, it could change the whole vibe, make the place feel more inviting, you know?" Sophia crossed her arms, considering his words. The idea of music in the restaurant wasn't one she had ever seriously entertained. La Tavola had always been a place where families came for the food and the familiar atmosphere. It was a simple, traditional spot, nothing fancy, but Jack's words made something stir in her. "I don't know," she muttered, still unconvinced. "We've never done anything like that before. People come here for the food, Jack. They don't want to hear live music. What if it doesn't work?" Jack leaned against the counter, his eyes never leaving hers. "What if it does? You don't know unless you try. And hey, we can make it affordable. We could offer a pay-what-you-can night. It'd attract all kinds of people, those who can't usually afford to eat out, and those who are just looking for something new. I've seen it work before. It doesn't have to be fancy, just simple, good food, and a little music to make the night feel special." Sophia hesitated. The idea of making such a drastic change was daunting. She had always been protective of the restaurant's identity, afraid that altering it too much would drive away the loyal customers who appreciated the homey, no-frills atmosphere. But Jack's persistence was wearing her down. She could see the passion in his eyes, and she could hear the sincerity in his voice. And when she looked over at Lily, who was humming softly to herself, she realized that the girl's hidden talent might be the spark that could bring something new to the restaurant. "I'm not sure," Sophia said quietly, shaking her head. "I don't want to change everything." Jack smiled gently. "I'm not asking you to change the entire restaurant, Sophia. I'm just saying, maybe it's time to try something new. You don't have to commit to it forever. Let's just give it a shot." Sophia looked down at the counter, her thoughts swirling. Could she afford to take this chance? Could she afford not to? After a long pause, she finally nodded. "All right, we'll try it. But just once. A pay-what-you-can night. We'll see how it goes." Jack's face lit up with gratitude, and he clapped his hands together. "Thank you. You won't regret it, I promise." As he walked away, Sophia felt a sense of unease and excitement in equal measure. It was a risk, but maybe, just maybe, it was one worth taking. The restaurant needed something new, and perhaps this was the push they all needed. The night before the first pay-what-you-can event was a restless one for Rosa. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the words from Jack's proposal echoing in her mind. "You'll be perfect, Rosa. People will love it," he had said. But she wasn't sure about that. She wasn't sure about any of it. For years, music had been her escape, but it had always been private, something she kept to herself, behind closed doors. Singing in front of others, that was a different story. It terrified her. What if she embarrassed herself? What if no one liked her voice? She couldn't handle that kind of rejection. Especially not now, when everything in her life seemed to be crumbling. The restaurant was failing, her family was struggling, and now she was supposed to sing for a room full of strangers. Her mind swirled with doubt. Her mother, Sophia, had been a pillar of strength throughout their hard times, but even Sophia had her limits. The restaurant was on the brink, and Rosa felt like she was the last thing holding it back. She had never been able to help with the business in the way her mother needed, and she resented herself for it. What good was I to anyone? The sound of soft footsteps outside her door broke her thoughts. She opened it, and there stood Lily, her wide eyes filled with curiosity and hope. "You're up late," Lily said quietly, peering into Rosa's room. Rosa forced a smile. Yeah, just thinking. Lily stepped inside without hesitation, sitting on the edge of the bed. About the singing, huh? Rosa sighed and nodded. I don't know if I can do it, Lily. What if I mess up? What if it's terrible? Lily looked at her for a long moment, then smiled shyly. I know how you feel. I've always wanted to sing in front of people, but I'm too scared. What if they don't like my voice? What if they laugh at me? Rosa blinked, surprised. She had never expected Lily, of all people, to feel the same way. The girl seemed so confident when she sang. But, you're amazing. You sing so beautifully. Why are you afraid? Lily looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. I guess. I'm afraid they'll think I'm just a kid, that they won't take me seriously. Rosa paused, her heart softening. For the first time, she saw Lily not as the quiet, reserved girl who seemed so at ease with everything, but as someone just like her, vulnerable, uncertain, and longing for approval. You know, Lily continued, maybe it's not about being perfect. Maybe it's just about sharing a little bit of yourself, like you do with your songs. Just sing because you love it. I'll be there, and Jack will play the guitar. You don't have to do it alone. Rosa's throat tightened. She had never really considered that before, singing for the joy of it, not the expectation of perfection. She had been so caught up in fear that she forgot why she loved music in the first place. She swallowed hard, feeling something stir inside her. What if Lily was right? What if this was the chance she had been waiting for? I'll do it, Rosa said, her voice barely a whisper. I'll sing, but only for you two. Just a small set, okay? Lily's face lit up, and she hugged Rosa tightly. Thank you. You'll be amazing, I know it. Later that night, after the restaurant had closed, the three of them gathered in the quiet back corner of the restaurant. Jack strummed his guitar gently, tuning it as Rosa stood, hesitant but determined, in front of him. Sophia watched from a distance, quietly sitting by the kitchen doorway. It was just the four of them, a small, intimate moment, but to Rosa it felt like the whole world was watching. Jack began playing softly, the chords familiar and comforting. Rosa took a deep breath, her hands trembling. Then she began to sing. Her voice, though soft at first, soon filled the room with an unexpected warmth. The song wasn't perfect. It wasn't rehearsed, but it was full of emotion, a rawness that touched something deep within all of them. Sophia's eyes filled with tears as she listened, surprised by the power of her daughter's voice. It was beautiful, pure, unpolished, but unmistakably real. Jack smiled, his eyes closed as he played, completely absorbed in the music. He had seen a lot in his time, but there was something special about this moment, something that felt like it could change everything. When the last note faded away, Rosa stood still, heart racing. She opened her eyes, uncertain of what to expect, but when she saw the smiles on Jack and Sophia's faces, something inside her shifted. I did it, she whispered, a small smile tugging at her lips. Sophia stood, her voice thick with emotion. You were amazing, Rosa. Absolutely amazing. And in that moment, something clicked. Rosa realized that singing wasn't about perfection. It was about sharing a piece of herself. And if she could do that, if she could just be herself, maybe, just maybe, she could help save the restaurant. The evening of the Pay What You Can night arrived, and the atmosphere at La Tavola was buzzing with an energy Sophia hadn't felt in months. The tables were set, the lights dimmed just enough to create an intimate, cozy vibe, and the sound of Jack tuning his guitar echoed softly through the small restaurant. Rosa, though still nervous, stood backstage, her stomach in knots. She was about to perform in front of a crowd for the first time. Sophia paced back and forth behind the counter, checking on the food, but her mind kept wandering back to the decision she had made. She had agreed to give this a chance, even though every part of her had been hesitant. Could music really turn things around for the restaurant? Could her daughter's voice bring in enough customers to save them? At first, the night felt like a quiet experiment, but as the clock struck 6, something surprising began to happen. The door creaked open, and in walked a few familiar faces from the neighborhood, local families who hadn't been in the restaurant for months. They'd heard about the event through word of mouth and, out of curiosity, decided to come and support. Sophia watched as they took their seats, chatting quietly, looking around, unsure of what to expect. Soon after, the trickle of customers became a steady stream. The sounds of laughter, clinking silverware, and casual conversation began to fill the restaurant, slowly drowning out the lingering silence of past nights. More people were coming in than Sophia could have hoped for. And what surprised her even more was that some of them didn't even glance at the menu before sitting down. They were here to experience something new, something different. Sophia's heart swelled with cautious hope. The atmosphere was changing. Then the lights dimmed even further, signaling the start of the performance. Rosa, holding her microphone in shaking hands, stepped up to the small stage, Jack beside her, tuning the final strings of his guitar. The crowd went quiet, their eyes on her. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. Rosa's knees nearly buckled, but then she saw her mother at the counter, a reassuring smile on her face. She saw Lily, sitting at a nearby table, looking at her with encouragement in her eyes. Taking a deep breath, Rosa began to sing. The first few notes were shaky, but they quickly grew stronger. The raw emotion in her voice reached across the room, drawing everyone in. Jack played softly behind her, matching her rhythm with his guitar, and the connection between them was palpable. It wasn't just the music, it was the feeling, the vulnerability in Rosa's voice that made people listen. The room, once filled with chatter and the sounds of silverware, fell into a quiet reverence. Sophia could hardly believe what she was hearing. The place, which had once been just another empty restaurant, now felt alive. People were actually paying attention, some even closing their eyes to take in the beauty of the song. It was like a breath of fresh air had been injected into the tired walls of La Tavola. The performance lasted for only a few songs, but by the end of the set, the room was filled with applause, some customers even standing in appreciation. Rosa, stunned by the warm reception, smiled shyly, her nerves replaced by a sense of pride she had never felt before. Sophia walked over to the stage after the performance, her voice thick with emotion. "Rosa, you were amazing. I never knew—" Her words trailed off as she pulled her daughter into a hug. Rosa, still overwhelmed, smiled in return. I think I can do this." The restaurant, once quiet and nearly empty, was now filled with people who had come not just for the food, but for the experience, for the music, for the chance to support a family that was finding their way again. The night ended with laughter and chatter, everyone talking about the music, the food, and the warm atmosphere they'd found at La Tavola. For the first time in a long time, Sophia felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the change they had been waiting for. As the days passed, La Tavola became a different place, not just because of the music, but because of the new dynamics unfolding within it. Jack and Sophia, despite their initial awkwardness, started working together more closely. And slowly, a subtle but undeniable connection began to form between them. At first, it was just small conversations over the counter, exchanging quick thoughts on the day's specials or how best to rearrange the dining area. But the more they spoke, the more they realized they shared an understanding of hardship and perseverance. Jack, with his weathered face and quiet wisdom, began offering advice that Sophia had never thought to ask for. His past experiences, filled with losses and struggles, gave him a unique perspective on life that intrigued her. One evening, after the restaurant had closed and they were cleaning up together, Jack casually remarked, "You know, it's easy to get lost in the mess of things. The debts, the bills, the expectations. But sometimes you have to step back and see it from a different angle. Life's about how you bounce back, not how you fall." Sophia, drying a dish, paused and looked at him. His words seemed to carry weight, a wisdom she hadn't expected to hear from someone like him. She nodded, taking in the meaning behind his words. There was something refreshing about Jack's perspective, something that gave her hope when she felt like she was on the edge of giving up. Jack smiled faintly, noticing the shift in her demeanour. "You've got a good thing here, Sophia, a real good thing. Sometimes it's just about letting it grow in its own way." Sophia couldn't help but admire him. His optimism, despite everything he had been through, was contagious. She found herself opening up to him more, sharing bits of her life she hadn't told anyone in years. She found comfort in his presence, a quiet strength that reassured her when things seemed too difficult. Meanwhile, Rosa's transformation was equally noticeable. At first, she had hesitated to believe that she could be more than just a bystander in the restaurant's revival. But after the success of their pay what you can night, she began to see herself differently. Every time she sang, the fear that had once gripped her chest started to loosen. The applause, the smiles from the customers, it was all starting to feel real. Her confidence grew with each performance. But it wasn't just her singing that began to change. She started to take on more responsibility at La Tavola, helping her mother with the day-to-day operations. She took charge of the music schedule, picking out songs for their events, and even began experimenting with writing her own music. It wasn't easy. Her first attempts at songwriting were clumsy and raw, but she felt alive when she was at the piano, playing with melodies and words. Rosa began to see herself as an integral part of the restaurant's revival. Her voice was no longer just a private escape. It was something she shared with others, something that gave La Tavola a soul. She no longer felt overshadowed by the failure of the business. Instead, she felt empowered by the fact that she could contribute to its success. Sophia noticed the change in Rosa as well. There was a new determination in her daughter's eyes, a quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. The bond between mother and daughter grew stronger as they worked together not only to save their business, but to build something they could both be proud of. And as the days passed, the restaurant continued to thrive. The once empty tables were now filled with people, drawn by the combination of good food, live music, and a sense of community. The atmosphere had transformed from one of uncertainty to one of possibility. There was a new rhythm in La Tavola, one that came not just from the music, but from the growing connections between the people who worked there and the people who came to share in their dreams. Life at La Tavola was changing in ways Sophia never could have imagined. As the restaurant continued to thrive with its new musical atmosphere, the bond between the family and Jack grew stronger. Jack and Sophia, though still cautious, found themselves spending more time together outside of the daily grind. Whether it was working late into the night to organize their next pay-what-you-can event or simply sharing quiet moments in the kitchen, their connection deepened. But there was someone else who was paying attention to every little detail, Lily. As quiet and reserved as she was, she had a keen eye for noticing things others might miss. Over the past few weeks, she had noticed the subtle way Jack and Sophia interacted, how Jack's gruff exterior softened whenever he spoke to Sophia, how Sophia seemed to look at him with an unspoken understanding, her usual worries momentarily forgotten when they were together. One afternoon, as Jack played his guitar in the corner of the kitchen while Sophia prepared a new batch of sauce, Lily couldn't resist teasing them. She had been watching the two of them exchange a quiet conversation, their heads close as they laughed softly at some shared joke. Lily, who was sitting at a nearby table, looked up from her notebook with a mischievous smile. She nudged her father, who was seated across from her. "Dad," she said, her voice light with playful curiosity, "do you think Jack and Mom are, a couple?" Max, who had been staring out the window, blinked in surprise, his mind not quite catching up with the conversation. "What?" he asked, distracted. Lily grinned. A couple. Jack and Mom. You don't see the way they look at each other? It's like they're dancing to the same beat." Max let out a low chuckle, clearly amused by his daughter's observation. "A couple? Come on, Lil. They're just friends." Lily raised an eyebrow, her smile widening. "Oh, really?" "Because every time Mom talks to Jack, she's smiling more than I've seen her smile in a long time. And Jack, well, he looks at her like she's the only thing that matters." She leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "I think he's got it bad, Dad." Max laughed again, though this time it was less certain. "I think you're reading too much into it, kiddo." But Lily wasn't done. "Hopeless romantic, that's what you are, Dad. It's obvious they like each other. It's just like the songs I sing, they're only a little shy about it." Max rolled his eyes, though a slight smile tugged at his lips. He shook his head. "You're not wrong about the songs, at least." Meanwhile, Jack, who had overheard some of the conversation, looked over at Lily with an amused smile. Despite his tough, weathered appearance, there was something soft in his gaze. He knew exactly what Lily was getting at, and he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. Sophia, however, was nowhere near as amused. She had been quietly wiping down the counter when she overheard the tail end of Lily's teasing. She felt a warmth creep up her neck, her cheeks flushing slightly. She didn't know how to respond to Lily's words, unsure whether to laugh it off or address it seriously. Lily, sensing her mother's unease, looked at her with a grin. "Come on, Mom, it's not like it's a secret. Everyone can see it, even Dad." Sophia cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. "Lily," she said, trying to sound stern but failing miserably, "stop teasing your father. And stop reading into things." But Lily's grin only grew wider. "I'm just saying, you're not fooling anyone." Sophia rolled her eyes, trying to hide the smile tugging at her lips. She knew Lily was just teasing, but there was a part of her that couldn't deny the truth in her daughter's words. Jack had become an important part of her life, and though she wasn't ready to admit anything out loud, she couldn't help but feel a spark whenever they were together. For now, though, she kept her thoughts to herself, letting the teasing continue as background noise to the growing connection between her and Jack. She wasn't sure where it would lead, but for the first time in a long while, she was starting to feel hopeful about the future. The evening had been a success, perhaps the most successful one yet. La Tavola was buzzing with the chatter of happy customers, the clinking of glasses and the warmth of laughter. Rosa had just finished a set of songs, her voice stronger and more confident than ever, while Jack's guitar played softly in the background. Sophia couldn't help but smile as she watched her daughter. The small, quiet girl who had once doubted her own abilities now stood tall, sharing her gift with others. For the first time in a long while, Sophia felt a sense of peace. The chaos, the worry, the never-ending pressure, it all seemed so far away. The debts that had once felt insurmountable, the fear of losing everything, those thoughts no longer consumed her. La Tavola had become a place of hope and transformation, not just for the community, but for her as well. Sophia found herself standing at the edge of the restaurant just outside the kitchen. The soft hum of conversation filled the air, and the smell of fresh pasta and garlic lingered, comforting her. She leaned against the doorframe, lost in her thoughts. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt so alive. The weight of her past mistakes, losing control of the business, failing to meet expectations, no longer felt like a burden. She had been given a second chance, not just with the restaurant, but with life itself. Jack had come into her life at the perfect time. His rough edges and quiet wisdom had shown her that it wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about learning from it and moving forward. He had brought not only new ideas to La Tavola, but a new outlook on life. The past few months had been about more than just reviving the restaurant. They had been about rediscovering herself. She hadn't realized it at first, but somewhere along the way, Sophia had stopped thinking of Jack as just a helping hand. He had become someone she could rely on, someone whose presence had brought her the strength she needed to face the future with hope. As she thought about all of this, she felt a warmth spread through her chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with the restaurant or its success, but everything to do with the connection she had found with him. That night, as the last of the customers slowly filtered out of the restaurant, Jack and Sophia found themselves alone in the quiet space. Jack was wiping down the counter, while Sophia prepared to close the kitchen for the night. They shared a comfortable silence, both of them taking in the success of the evening, though neither spoke of it directly. It was as if the success was understood between them. Finally, Jack looked up at her, his face serious but warm. "Sophia," he said softly, "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, about how far we've come, how much we've changed." His voice trailed off, and he took a step closer. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She met his gaze, unsure of where this conversation was going. Jack smiled, a gentle but confident smile. "You've given me more than I ever thought I could have. This restaurant, this new life. You've shown me what it means to keep moving forward, even when everything seems lost. I've found something here with you, something real." He paused, taking a deep breath, then dropped to one knee. The movement was smooth, almost surreal. Sophia felt her breath catch in her throat. "Will you marry me, Sophia?" he asked, his voice steady and sincere. "Not just because I love you, but because I want to build a future with you, a future where we don't have to fear what's next, because we've already found something worth holding on to." Sophia stood frozen, her heart racing. She had never imagined this moment, never thought she would find someone who could make her feel so whole again. Her thoughts raced as she looked at him, her mind flashing with memories of everything they had been through together. Finally, she smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Jack." With that, the world seemed to shift, the weight that had pressed so heavily on her shoulders lifting. The restaurant was no longer just a business. It was a symbol of hope, of second chances, of new beginnings. Sophia and Jack, along with Rosa and Lily, had built something beautiful, and this was only the beginning. As Jack stood and pulled her into a tight embrace, Sophia knew that this new chapter wasn't just about love. It was about finding the courage to step into the future together without fear, with the knowledge that they had already created something worth fighting for. La Tavola was reborn, and so were they. The transformation of La Tavola was nothing short of miraculous. What had once been a struggling, nearly forgotten restaurant, hanging on the edge of bankruptcy, had now blossomed into a thriving local treasure. Word had spread quickly about the combination of delicious, authentic Italian food and the intimate live music performances that filled the restaurant with a warmth and charm like no other. Sophia and Jack had worked tirelessly side by side, and their partnership had turned La Tavola into more than just a business. It was a symbol of hope for the neighborhood. As they continued to nurture their restaurant, their love story became a cherished part of the establishment's legacy, and customers would often reminisce about how the couple had turned the restaurant around, not just through hard work, but through love, resilience, and music. The restaurant had become a haven for locals, a place where families gathered, friends celebrated, and strangers became regulars, all drawn in by the welcoming atmosphere and the enchanting sound of Rosa's voice. The music that once started as a small, intimate performance for family and close friends had grown into a regular feature of the restaurant. Rosa's singing, combined with Jack's guitar playing, created an experience that felt more like visiting old friends than dining out. Sophia, once weighed down by the burden of failure, now walked through the restaurant with her head held high. She'd built more than a successful business. She had created a community, a place where people could come together and experience something real. She often found herself watching her daughter sing, her voice echoing through the dining room. Rosa had blossomed into a confident young woman, and her music had become a beacon for anyone who had ever doubted their own potential. What had begun as a small dream of singing in the kitchen had turned into a local sensation. Rosa's voice was now known throughout the neighborhood, and before long she began to perform at local festivals and small events. It wasn't just her music that was growing. La Tavola was expanding as well. What had started as a single restaurant now had plans to open a second location. People traveled from all over to experience the food, the music, and the heartfelt story of the family behind it all. Each success was a reminder of how far they had come, and how much they had rebuilt from the ground up. As for Jack and Sophia, they continued to run the business together with pride. They were no longer just partners in business, they were a family. Their bond had deepened in ways neither had imagined when they first met. They complemented each other in every way. Jack's creativity and ability to think outside the box, Sophia's strong leadership and business acumen, and their shared love of music and good food. Together, they had created something bigger than themselves. And then there was the legacy of music. La Tavola had become a symbol of healing, of transformation, and of the power of music to change lives. People who had struggled, people who had once given up, now came to the restaurant for more than just a meal. They came to feel inspired. They came to hear the story of how a family had found their way back from the brink of disaster. They came to witness the magic of a dream reborn. As they looked to the future, Jack and Sophia knew their work wasn't done. The restaurant would continue to grow, just like their family. And as for Rosa, well, she was already on her way to pursuing a music career that would take her far beyond the walls of La Tavola. But no matter where life took them, they would always return to the place where it all began, a small, family-owned restaurant that had become a symbol of love, resilience, and the power of second chances.